Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, and share buttons. While coming into 2023, we discussed the prospect of a real famine on a global scale, famine in many parts of the world. And unfortunately, we're starting to see some of that now. We're going to go over some of that. Jesus said that famine would be a general sign of the time frame of his return. And the third horseman in Revelation 6 brings widespread global famine. And we're going to talk about how right now we are set up to see that unlike any other generation before. So, why are we seeing some of these food shortages? We're seeing around various parts of the United States, eggs are in short supply. We're seeing various food supplies and shortage, out of stock. Around the globe, we're seeing massive food inflation. Why are we seeing those things? Well, last year we talked about the many reasons for that. We have supply chain disruptions due to the shutdowns of the last 3 years. That led to record high fertilizer prices, diesel prices. Those are the top two agricultural inputs and cost for farming. We talked about droughts, natural disasters in key places, and of course the war in Ukraine. And while some of those things have let up a bit, we don't see the record fertilizer prices and diesel prices we saw just a few months ago. Those prices are still highly elevated on a historical basis. So they're not at the all-time highs they were before, but they're still well above where they were 2 years ago. And that's having a huge impact on agriculture and food supplies all around the world. And we're going to talk about that here, starting with this article from Zero Hedge. It says USDA reveals U.S. corn harvested acres at 2008 levels amid mega drought. Last year was a bad year for corn. The latest USDA report shows drought conditions and extreme weather wreaked havoc on croplands. USDA unexpectedly slashed its outlook for domestic corn production amid a severe drought across the Western Farm Belt. Farmers in Nebraska, Kansas, and Texas were forced to abandon drought-plagued fields. I take exception with that word unexpectedly. We were talking about this over and over in the summertime, and we pulled up the USDA figures for the whole world for corn and rice and wheat. We went through those and looked at their projections, which basically you've got a bunch of bureaucrats who said, well, what was it last year? And they penciled that number in for this year without looking at the conditions on the ground. And we said they're going to be changing these estimates. They're going to be changing these estimates, and this is why. And we followed the crop tours that took place in the cornfields back into summer. And we showed pictures of what they were finding on the tours. They were finding these drought conditions. So you could see this coming a mile away. It's not unexpected. It's just the government is so incompetent. It takes them so long to catch up with the reality on the ground. So if you've been counting on the USDA to give you up-to-date figures on corn production or the production of any other agricultural commodity, well, you're going to be way behind and knowing what's going on, because we saw this coming months ago. So, not going to let them get away with saying unexpectedly there. It says the agency estimated farmers harvested 79.2 million acres, a decline of 1.6 million acres versus the previous estimate, the smallest acres harvest since 2008. The unexpected cut to U.S. harvested corn areas means grain supplies are a lot tighter than realized. A report Thursday showed the corn area in the world's largest producer, because the United States is the world's largest producer of corn, is at the smallest since 2008, with crops failing in states such as Texas and Nebraska. That's due to persistent drought conditions in the western part of the country that could also hit harvest for wheat plants that are currently dormant for the winter. The crop-failed lands reduced total harvest corn acreage to levels not seen since 2008. We have a chart here. Less acreage tightens supply and might continue to put a bid under corn prices. Global food prices remain at crisis levels. So here we go. Even though we're not at the peak of what it was last year, we're still well elevated above levels that, this right here was the Arab Spring when we had revolution in Egypt. And we're still at that spot right now. And then it says, here's the current drought situation across the Farm Belt. Corn production woes from the U.S. don't bode well in the fight to crush food inflation. It seems as if the prices for our food will remain high well throughout 2023. And they will, for all of the reasons we just discussed. We can throw in currency printing and stimulus checks and all of those things artificially propping up demand as well. But as we've talked about, this is, when you have, there's not going to be a no food at the grocery store if you live in the United States. If you live in most places, there will be food in the grocery store. It's just going to be much, much more expensive. And this is going to have ripple effects that will impact different nations in different ways, some severely. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But this continues on with the CNN article. It says, Russia's war in Ukraine sparked a historic food crisis. It's not over. So again, just because it's not as fertilizer and diesel prices aren't at their peak, food prices aren't at the peaks they were a few months ago, doesn't mean everything's wonderful again. It says, grain is once again leaving Ukrainian ports. The price of fertilizer is falling sharply, and billions of dollars in aid has been mobilized. Yet the world is still in the grips of the worst food crisis in modern history as Russia's war in Ukraine shakes global agricultural systems already grappling with the effects of extreme weather and the pandemic. Market conditions may have improved in recent months, but experts do not expect imminent relief. That means more pain for vulnerable communities already struggling with hunger. It also boosts the risk of starvation and famine in countries such as Somalia, which is contending with what the United Nations describes as a catastrophic food emergency. All the major causes of the food crisis are still with us: conflict, COVID, climate change, high fuel prices. Carrie Fowler, the U.S. Special Envoy for Global Food Security, told CNN. I do think we have to prepare for 2023 being a rough year. And that's true, guys. We've talked about global food, the prices for these agricultural commodities are set at the margin, and they're set on a global basis. So if you have a shortfall of just a few percentage points, that can have an outsized impact on what the price is overall. Just because you have a decline of, say, 2% in the production of something doesn't mean you'll just see a 2% increase in its cost. You could see a 50% increase in the cost just from that 2% decline. The reasons vary. It's supply and demand, and it's a very fragile equilibrium there for, a small drop, and especially a 10% drop in U.S. corn production can have an outsized impact, and it's going to impact different nations in different ways. We've talked about before, countries like China and the United States, European Union countries, Japan, which is one of the largest exporters of food in the world, or largest importers of food, my mistake. They import so much of their food, and they have the wealth to bid on all of these exported agricultural commodities and bid the prices up. And that means the poorer nations have fewer resources to go out and secure their food supply. So these poorer nations that are dependent on imports of food in order to feed their people are the ones where we're going to see the crisis hit hardest. And of course, no matter what nation you live in, the poorest people are going to be hit hard by food inflation in general. Again, the food would be available, but it would be so expensive it will be unaffordable for many. So let's look at an example of this. This is about Egypt. It says, after Pakistan, Egypt, battling acute food shortage amid growing economic crisis, supplies rationed. It says food items have become so expensive in Egypt that the poor are finding it difficult to feed themselves and their families. The shocking thing is that instead of adopting proper measures to deal with the economic crisis in Egypt, a government agency has asked people to eat chicken paws to meet their protein needs in an era of high inflation. In Egypt, which is mostly dependent on food imports, the inflation in the prices of food items has put about 100 million people in severe economic crisis. The situation has assumed such severe proportions that in big supermarkets, customers are being allowed to buy only 3 bags of parboiled rice, 2 bottles of milk, and 1 bottle of oil, so we're seeing rationing there. It says Rehab, a 34-year-old woman who arrived to buy goods at a bakery in Cairo, said the bread she used to buy for 1 Egyptian pound now cost 3 pounds. Rehab said her husband earns 6,000 pounds in a month. As there is inflation now, the same salary, which used to run for the whole month, is now ending in 10 days. So they only have a third of what they need to live on. It says Rita, a 55-year-old who feeds a family of 13, said the meat, which used to be cheap to cook, is now costing so much it's not even being kept as an option. She said the price of meat has doubled in the last few days. Rita informed she is earning money by working in 2 places, yet many common things are still out of her reach. So guys, this is a perfect illustration of what we're talking about when we say that the poorest countries are really going to get hit hard by this crisis because Egypt is dependent on food imports in order to feed their population. And those imports, there aren't as many of them to go around as there have been in past years. And they don't have the economic resources to outbid a country like Japan, which is also importing vast amounts of food. And so the price is driven up so high that what makes it into the country is so high priced people cannot afford it. So this is a crisis that's just going to ratchet up even further. And as we said before, it's going to hit every nation, just some to further degrees. But even in nations that are considered wealthy, we're going to see people struggling with food inflation, as we've already seen over the past year. And this article shows us that. This is about Canada. It says soaring grocery prices in Canada spark increase in thefts from stores. It says a university researcher in Halifax is speaking out about the cost of groceries in Canada and an increase in thefts from grocery stores. Sylvain Charlebois, not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, but hopefully I got it right, wrote an op-ed piece last week that stated grocery store owners are feeling more concerned about theft than before. You can expect more cameras, more surveillance, and more security in general as your favorite grocer won't have a choice, he wrote in the piece. We talked about this also over the summer and many times last year, that as this happened, we would see an increase in theft as people's options become unlimited. Many people will turn to theft if faced with starvation, if faced with hunger. And what's that going to mean? Well, if the grocery store is to remain open, they're going to have to secure that food supply. And we talked about eventually there will be armed guards at the grocery store, and you may very well have to show your central bank digital currency ID or whatever it may be. Over in Sri Lanka, you had QR codes on your smartphone in order to get your fuel ration. Will we see something similar for food rations all over the world as this crisis picks up? You know, you may have to show identification to go into the store. So if these thefts continue. So he goes on, he says, when he shared the post on social media, He said he received many responses from people who were not concerned about the rise in theft and some who were actually advocating for it. So first of all, there's a lot of anger toward grocery stores right now, grocers, and frankly, there's a track record, he's told Global News Morning. If you go back a few years ago with the bread price fixing scheme, nobody went to jail, nobody was fined. The hero pay scandal, which happened during COVID, and now with food inflation being over 10%, people are upset and they're concerned and they're looking for a scapegoat, and that scapegoat is the grocery store. He said industry data shows grocery stores lose between $2,000 and $5,000 a week on average due to theft. And guys, that's only going to drive that price up even more for everybody else. If these grocery stores are losing a certain amount due to theft, they don't go, oh, well, in order to remain in business, they have to raise the rest of the prices in their store in order to reflect the impact of that theft, or else they go out of business. So this has an even further impact on food inflation, people's ability to feed themselves. And so as we go into this year, we're going to see more and more of this occurring. And that's why several months ago we brought this up and said, you need to be preparing for this if you're not already, even if it just means buying an extra can of beans when you go to the grocery store. Find things that have a long-term shelf life and put them away. Build out a deep pantry so that you can increase your own food security. Set things aside for your local food bank, for your neighbors. Set aside funds, if you have them, to give to international charities that can go out and help feed people. All of these are things that we needed to have been doing over the last several months, and the need is even higher now because this isn't going to get better anytime soon. Now, in regard to Bible prophecy, Jesus said famine would be a generalized sign of his return, and we've had famines throughout history. But I think what this shows us is when we look at Revelation 6, which occurs, these are events that occur during the tribulation. And the third horse in Revelation 6 brings global famine. It takes a day's wages to buy barely enough food to survive. That's how bad the food inflation is. Well, that event is preceded by global war. So think of the impact that the shutdowns and the war in Ukraine have had and contributing to the food crisis we're witnessing right now and how severe it is. And just think of how bad it would be if we had an outbreak of global war and how that supply chain would be destroyed. We are so dependent in our day and time on a very sophisticated, complex, global supply chain just to feed ourselves, not just to make cars and electronics, but to provide us with the food we need to survive. And we've seen how fragile that supply chain is. That wasn't the case 100 years ago, much less 2,000 years ago when the book of Revelation was written. So we see now more than ever, the stage is set for that type of famine and massive food inflation to come about in the event that there is a World War III. And Revelation 6 tells us there will be a World War III. So, guys, what does this mean? Well, it means, it doesn't mean that you have to go buy a whole bunch of food and put it away somewhere, because again, those events are going to happen during the tribulation. And if you know Jesus, if you are a follower of Jesus, you will not be here when that time comes. But I think what it clearly tells us is this is yet another sign that we live in the season of the Lord's return. Israel is back in the land. It's a nation again. Generations of Christians could not point to the existence of Israel as a sign that it didn't exist. The Jewish people are back in control of the city of Jerusalem. Again, generations of Christians could not say that. The gospel is being preached all over the world. We see the Gog of Magog alliance forming. We see technologies that would enable many of the events in the book of Revelation, like viewing the bodies of the two witnesses and the mark of the beast, to actually be implemented with outside of the supernatural. Ours is the first generation to see that. Jesus said, when you see all of these things happening, you can know that his return is near. He's right at the door. So that's what we should take away from this. Yes, we should be preparing for whatever time we have left here on earth to help ourselves, our family, our friends, our neighbors. And who is your neighbor? Jesus already told us the answer to that question, right? So we need to be helping as many people as we can. But overall, what you need to take from this is we are so near, we are so close to the return of Jesus. And so we need to be doing the Lord's work. We can see the finish line, run the race, do what the Lord has told you to do the work you're supposed to do here on earth, because time is running out. Jesus is coming soon. So let me know what you think. Leave your comments below. Make sure to like and share this. God willing, I'll see you tomorrow. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to sign up for my free monthly newsletter and get your copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Just follow the link in the description to get your free book. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.